So in the 1940s, there was this English pastor named Francis Dixon who hired a young pastor to work with him. And the young man had a pretty cool story. When he was a teenager, he had a random conversation with a guy on George Street in Sydney, Australia, and met Jesus. And a couple months after he hired this pastor, Dixon went to a conference where this famous evangelist of the day was speaking. And this guy shared his testimony that when he was in his 20s, he met Jesus through a random conversation that he had with this guy on George Street in Sydney, Australia. And Dixon thought that was a little bit weird and a little bit crazy. And then a couple months after that, he was guest speaking at a different church, and two sailors from the British Navy got up to give their testimony. And they said that when they had been stationed in Sydney, Australia, they were walking back to the boat drunk one night. They had a random conversation with this guy on George Street, and they met Jesus, and Dixon was blown away. And he had occasion not long after that to go to Australia and do some speaking, but he was in Adelaide and not Sydney. And he kind of forgot about this massive coincidence until he met person after person after person in Adelaide, Australia, who had met Jesus through a random conversation they had with this guy on George Street in Sydney, Australia. And Francis Dixon decided, I gotta go find this guy. And so he went to a church near this place where all these people had met Jesus and said, hey, do you have any idea who this guy could be? And the pastor was like, yeah, it's Frank Jenner. It's Frank Jenner. And so Dixon arranged to go meet Frank Jenner, and he was ready to meet this like superhero of the Christian faith. And he walked into Jenner's house and he saw this ordinary guy. This guy who would have absolutely been forgotten to the world if Francis Dixon hadn't had this weird coincidence of meeting all these people and then written about him. See, Frank Jenner's story was that as a young man, he was a rebellious, drunken sailor, and one night he was walking back to his ship, which was stationed in Sydney, completely wasted, and he had a conversation with a random guy about Jesus on the streets of Sydney, Australia, and it blew his mind, and he decided that Jesus changed everything. And so he was going to live out an epic adventure of telling people about Jesus on the streets of Sydney, Australia. But here's the thing about Frank Jenner. Frank Jenner wasn't a pastor, and he wasn't an evangelist. He wasn't a military leader. He wasn't a civic leader. Frank Jenner was an underemployed janitor. Like, he was in the Navy, and after he retired, he struggled through periods of not being able to find gainful employment. And for a big chunk of his life, he spent it in like what most of us would call soulless corporate America, sweeping the same hallways over and over and over again, washing the same windows over and over and over again. And it would have been really easy for Frank to go through that life the same way so many people all around us, the same way so many of us go through life, and to just see his life as ordinary, and see his life as boring, and see his life as mundane and nothingness, and to feel like when he swept that floor for the 300th time that he wasn't really making a difference. But that's not how Frank Jenner decided to do it. Frank Jenner met Jesus and decided he was going to live an epic story. And then Dixon started telling Jenner about all these people that he'd met all over the world that Jenner had impacted, and Jenner started to tear up. And he said he had no idea that he'd probably shared Christ with over 100,000 people in Sydney, but he had no idea what sort of impact that made long term. He prayed with a lot of them to receive Christ, but he didn't know what any of them were doing now. And Dixon wondered why he kept doing it. Like, what it was that kept inspiring him to just have these random conversations with people. And Jenner said that he was determined that he wasn't going to live like an ordinary, boring life. That he was there on the streets in the middle of the hustle and bustle and workaday life of Sydney. And he wasn't going to just go to work and come home, because what he saw there wasn't just people walking through their daily grind. What he saw was an epic battle right in front of him between hope and hopelessness, between darkness and light, an epic battle being fought for the eternity of souls created in the image of God, for a life and for a forever with him. And Jenner said he just decided he had to charge out into the battle. What if we saw life like Frank Jenner saw life? I mean, by every measure that the world uses, Frank Jenner was an absolute nobody. He was just an ordinary human being with an ordinary job and ordinary problems, with every reason to get convinced, like we all do sometimes, that all of the stuff on his calendar didn't really matter as much as he wished it mattered. But Frank just didn't see the world like that. He just didn't see the drudgery as drudgery. He saw a war, a battle against an enemy that wanted to seek kill, and destroy. An enemy that is not flesh and blood. He saw a fight for souls, and he decided he was going to live an epic life. It's really easy not to live like that. I think Frank Jenner is probably incredibly unique in the history of the world. I think for so many of us, even those of us who really love our jobs and love what we do, it's easy to just get so frustrated with the tasks on our schedule, to look at another stupid meeting and another dumb project and another useless homework assignment and another frustrating laundry day. Like, I don't know, if you're anything like me, laundry isn't again, laundry is still. Like, and just to look at all the tasks that we got on our calendars and feel like we're just getting ground up by the grind. That we're getting defeated by the drudgery, that we're getting murdered by the mundane, and to just see so little purpose in all of it that we just kind of live lives that we're living, but we're not really living. We're feeling less than fully alive, and we're waiting and we're hoping for these mountaintop moments where we can meet with God and we can find purpose and we can do the stuff that really matters, and we're living for those, and we're hoping someday we can feel fully alive. But in the middle of the grind, we just feel like frustrated and bored at best, or like our souls are being sucked out of us by our work at worst. And what I want us to know today is that God wants to meet us right there in that space. That God wants to change our lens right there, right here, right where we are 40 plus hours a week. Because here's the thing about God. I think in our frustration, in the drudgery, and in the moments where we feel less than fully alive, and just the ordinary stuff of our lives, we don't always recognize His presence. But God is just as present and just as real, and He's doing just as incredible of things. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But He's doing just as many incredible things in our valleys and in our frustrating moments and in the grind of our lives as He is on the mountaintops and in the great moments of our lives. God is real, and He's here. In Colossians 3, Paul tells us, like, whatever it is that you have to do, like whatever tasks God's put in front of you, do them all to the best of your ability for the glory of God. And that's hard to do. I don't know about you, but even as a pastor, I love what I get to do. I love it. I am thankful every day for the job that I have. I love it. I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, but there are parts of what I do that I don't like. And even as a dad, I said this on Sunday, there are parts of diaper changing that I don't like. I hate them. I'm sick of them. And there's so many things that make up my schedule that I don't want to do. And yet Paul says, hey, do it all. Everything that you find to do. Everything that gets placed in your hands, do it all for the glory of God. I think sometimes we struggle to do that because we don't see the big picture. We're so zoned in on this thing that we dislike, on this thing that we find draining, that we don't step back to see that God sees a bigger picture than us, and God has a bigger plan than us, and God is working to use the stuff that we're doing to bless the people around us and to change the world. I said this on Sunday, but I'll say it again. Anything that adds any value to anybody creates a better future, and so it's worth doing. Anything that adds any value to anybody creates a better future. We are created, designed by God to be His co-creators in this whole enterprise of the world. To be people that rewrite the future for ourselves and for the people around us. And everything that God gives us to do, whether we like it or we don't like it, whether we believe it's significant, whether the world says it's significant or the world doesn't, is something that God can use not only to glorify Himself, but to add value to the people around us. And that's a phenomenal thing to be invited into. In Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story about Judgment Day, about separating people. And he says, on that day, I'll say to some of you, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And you'll say, when, Lord? I don't remember doing any of that stuff. I'm really excited that I did, but I don't remember it. He said, and others of you, I'm going to look at you and say, I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you didn't give me a drink. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and you didn't care for me. I was in prison and you didn't come to visit me. And you'll say, when, Lord, when? If only I'd seen that, I would have done it. I don't remember that at all. When? And there's this philosopher, Lester DeCoster, theologian, who says that we tend to read that passage through the lens of like big charitable events. Like, I saw a homeless guy on the side of the road and I either did or didn't do something for him. He said, but that's not really what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus is talking about our work lives. He's talking about what it is that we do 40 plus hours a week, 50 plus weeks a year. He's talking about whether we're faithful with the tasks that God has put in front of us to bless the world. We mentioned a few weeks ago that Martin Luther said our vocations are masks for the face of God. And the truth is this, that God has you right where he has you. And it doesn't mean you can never change jobs, you can never do anything different. But it means that God has you right where he has you, because right where you are, you have a chance to bless the world. You have a chance to make the world around you better. And whatever it is God's placed in front of you, if you do it to the best of your ability, it'll bring glory to him. It'll add value to people. It'll point the world towards Jesus. That's what God created you for. It's what he created you to do. And again, it doesn't mean you can never change jobs and you have to love everything about your job. But what it means is you need to stop. We all need to stop believing that in order to live the adventurous life and the meaningful life and the full life and the real life that we want, that we got to be somebody else in some other place doing some other thing. That's just not the case. Earth is crammed with heaven. Earth is crammed with heaven. Every little bit of everything we do is intended by God to be an opportunity to bring glory to him and add value to people. It's what we're created for. So I want to invite us tonight to live like Frank Jenner, to be custodians and teachers and moms and pastors and business people and claims adjusters and accountants and builders and custodians and whatever else it is we do. In every little place that we are, that Revision Church goes this week, I want to invite us to live like Frank Jenner and say, no, I'm not going to live a life of drudgery and unimportance and believe that what I have to do doesn't really matter. I'm going to live an epic story. Because the truth is that we are surrounded every day by people who are fighting, by people who are engaged in a battle for their eternity. And we have a chance to be a part of what God is doing to bless the world and to draw people to himself. We have a chance to live out our creative purpose every single day of our lives. So my prayer this week is that we begin to live like that. We begin to see the world like that. We begin to look for God because he's there. He's not just on the mountaintops. Look for God right where he is in the mundane and not just the Instagrammable. Because when we do, what we're going to see is an incredible amount of beauty in the world. And what we're going to find is a life of incredible adventure and purpose as we live out the purpose that God created us for.